In this segment, I'd like to talk about the responsibilities of the federal and state government in monitoring the whereabouts of the convicted sex offender. But before I do that, I'd like to give you a case that occurred in 1996. I believe it is one of the first successful investigations, indictments, and convictions of a cybercrime sexual predator. Brown versus U.S. is the style of the case. Brown is a 40-year-old white male who lives in the basement of his parents' home. He is very obese. He weighs approximately 400 pounds. Mary is a 12-year-old Caucasian girl living with her mother in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. Brown finds Mary in a chat room, I believe it is myspace.com, and they begin to engage in a conversation. And Brown, through a series of oblique questions, finds out that Mary is a rather unhappy child. She has difficulty making friends at school. She does not like her parent, her mother, and does not like herself. Brown uses this information and begins to develop what is required for any predator opportunity, and that is he develops trust and he develops a relationship with her. And this is a long process. What I am going to tell you took about 2 years to unfold. So to encapsulate, Brown begins to have conversations with Mary. He finds these things out about her, and he feels her pain, and he lets her know that. Now, Brown lies and initially says that he is 15 years old and that he has the same problems that Mary does, and he then begins to use that and gets Mary over a period of time to send him some photographs of herself. Now he has entered into that personal realm. These are not sexually explicit at first, and he tells her when he receives the photographs how hot she is, and would she mind wearing certain colors and certain types of dresses and certain blouses. When she complies, now he knows that he has begun to have significant influence on her. Eventually, and again, this is a long process, eventually he talks Mary into sending him photographs of her in sexually explicit positions. Showing her in her underwear, taking off her bra, exposing her breast, etc. He sends her gifts and he continues the relationship. He sends her money, he sends her recordings of her favorite artists, etc. After about 2 years, he wants to meet her. Now he has to tell her the truth, and he does. And he says from the FBI, the seized emails, he says that I am still the person that you love, even though I am older and obese, or he says heavy. I still want to meet you, and we can still meet each other because we are in love, etc., etc. Apparently, Mary, in conversation, because she has sent him her underwear, wants him to send her a pair of his underwear. He does so. Her mother finds a pair of 48 size underwear in Mary's drawers, Chester drawers, and obviously begins to interrogate the child. Long story short, they find out what is going on. She calls the police call the FBI, and as an end result, Brown is now serving time in a federal prison. What do we do with these people? Once we have found them, we've investigated, they are indicted, and they're convicted, Brown is probably ready to be released, if not already. So what do we do with them? Well, the federal government has 3 laws that I would like for you to be aware of. The government has enacted 3 pieces of legislation to monitor the whereabouts of those convicted of sexual assaults, both against adults and children. The first one is the Jacob Wettering Law, and this law was enacted in 1994, and it creates money to help the states create state sexual registration requirements for those convicted in the states regarding sex offenses. And that's all it did. It just allows the states to have a pot of money to go after in the grant form if they are going to create a state registry for sex offenders. Second is the Pam Lynchner law, and that law adds more to it. That law requires the FBI to create a national sexual registry of those convicted of both adult and child sexual molestation. It also adds to that if it is not a child who is sexually molested, then for the registration to occur that is created by the FBI in their database, the crime must be of a violent nature in terms of a sex offense. That then does not require the FBI to make that information available to the public at large. You would have to go into the field representative in your area. There would be an office, and you would give them specific information, and they would tell you if that person was indeed convicted of a sexual offense and where he lived. That did not turn out to be to control the whereabouts of the sexual offenders, and as well as would be liked. And Bill Clinton then signed into law the Megan's Law. And you may remember that Megan is a 12-year-old girl who was kidnapped from her home by a sexual offender who lives across the street, and eventually she is sexually assaulted very violently and murdered. As a result of that, Congress passes then Megan's Law, which I said was signed into active law by President Clinton. This requires a little more specific monitoring of the sex offenders. Here, as opposed to just making the money available, the federal government now compels the states to create a sexual offender registry. As a result, every state in the union now has the requirements that we were going to talk about and to discuss in a minute regarding the requirements of sexual offender registration by the states. However, the core requirement of the Megan's Law, which is different from the former two, is that parents have a right to know if a sexual offender, that is somebody who has been convicted of a sexual offense, is going to live in their neighborhood. And as a result, that now is the law of the land. Now, there's a lot of conversation regarding the pros and cons of Megan's Law, and I'd like to just give you a brief encapsulation of both. First, let's talk about the pros. Megan's Law is a good law according to some authorities because, one, it allows, obviously, as the purpose of the law, it allows parents to know, if they choose, that were the whereabouts of those who have been convicted of sexual offenses, where they live, and if they live in the neighborhood where their children are. The reason for this is this, according to some authorities, is a crime that has a high recidivist rate, meaning that once an individual is convicted of a sexual offense, he, and it is he, will commit that offense over and over again. So we need to know where these individuals live, where they are going to reside. Also, it allows government agencies to inexpensively and also very expediently find out if people who are applying for a job, say for example school teachers, or somebody who wants to volunteer in the schools, or somebody who wants to be a Boy Scout leader or a Girl Scout leader, something to that effect, a volunteer. It allows the people in charge of those various agencies to quickly go to a website which would be developed at the county level, and type in those names, or they can simply go to the site where there will be a photograph and basic information of the individual and the crime that he has been convicted of. So there are others, other pros, but those are the two that I think are the most significant. And you can see in the PowerPoint presentation that accompanies this video segment some more. The criticisms are also equally important to understand, and this would be those who are con to the issue, and authorities would suggest a couple things about requiring sex offenders to register. The first one, in some states, because every state has to have a registry, but how they create that registry, how they make that registry available to the public, and how much information they put in there is entirely up to each state. One of the things that has been criticized about Megan's Law is that in a number of states, if you have been convicted of public nudity, if you have been convicted of as a prank mooning somebody, you could be required to be on that sexual registry where your face and a brief description of your crime is going to occur. So you can see that would be public humility, which may not equal the punishment of the crime that you have committed, i.e. mooning or some form of public nudity. Second, because there is a requirement of the Eighth Amendment that prohibits both the federal and state government against cruel and unusual punishment, it has been argued that requiring sex offenders to register and to make their crime continually known after they have served their prison sentence is a matter of cruel and unusual punishment. The theory is that once you have done your sentence, then you have served your punishment to both the federal and the state government, and the punishment should end at that point. Third, there has been incidents in the past 2 years, I could find 4, where individuals have used these websites to literally hunt down and murder individuals who have been convicted of this crime. As you can see, that is a significant problem. There has been a number of incidents where neighbors have gotten together as vigilante groups. They have vandalized the homes of these individuals. They have threatened them. They have even arsoned, and as I said, the extreme is there have been murders that have been committed because of the requirements of sexual registry. So there are a number of pros and cons, and I just want you to be aware of them. Now, that is the federal requirements. So again, to recap, I want you to know all 3 of the laws, the Wittering, the Lynchner, and Megan's Law. Take a look at the PowerPoints to support them. And next, I want to give you an example, a model of a state enacted piece of legislation that requires all sex offenders to register in the state. Now, I'm not going to give you a specific state because what I have is a model, and you are going to see the information that I'm going to give you in the next segment will be part of any of the 50 state sexual registration response to that. So I will do the state requirements, and I'd like to do it in a question and briefly answer segment because I think it will make more sense that way. So we'll do that next. In this segment, I'd like to talk about the responsibilities of the federal and state government in monitoring the whereabouts of the convicted sex offender. But before I do that, I'd like to give you a case that occurred in 1996. I believe it is one of the first